When the credible bomb threat came in during the championship game with 80,000 fans in the stadium, team security coordinator Rick Mason had minutes to prevent disaster. But instead of following standard evacuation protocols, he immediately began implementing explosive ordnance disposal procedures with the precision of someone who had spent 10 years as an Army EOD specialist, revealing that their sports security coordinator wasn't just a guard. He was a former military bomb disposal expert whose expertise had been tested, defusing IEDs in Iraq and Afghanistan. Rick Mason had been working as head of security for the Metro City Lions professional football team for 6 years, and in that time he'd become an integral part of the organization's game day operations. The 85,000-seat stadium was one of the largest sports venues in the country, hosting not just NFL games, but major concerts, college championships, and international soccer matches that brought together crowds from across the nation. At 41, Rick carried himself with the calm professionalism of someone who understood that managing large crowds required both tactical awareness and people skills. He was built like someone who stayed in excellent physical condition, but his approach to stadium security emphasized prevention and coordination rather than confrontation. His security team respected his leadership, and players trusted his judgment about personal safety issues both inside and outside the facility. The stadium itself was a marvel of modern engineering and security technology. Multiple entry points monitored by sophisticated surveillance systems, coordinated security zones managed by different law enforcement agencies, and emergency response protocols designed to handle everything from medical emergencies to weather-related evacuations. On game days, it became a small city with its own police force, medical facilities, and complex logistics that required military-level coordination. What made Rick different from typical sports security coordinators was his ability to assess genuine threats among the thousands of routine security concerns that arose during major sporting events. While other security managers focused on crowd control and VIP protection, Rick found himself automatically evaluating structural vulnerabilities, analyzing suspicious behavior patterns, and maintaining awareness of the kind of catastrophic threats that could turn a celebratory gathering into a national tragedy. His colleagues often remarked on his unusual technical knowledge, the way he understood building systems, electrical infrastructure, and the complex engineering that made modern stadiums possible. They attributed it to thorough professional training and natural curiosity, never suspecting that his expertise came from years of studying how explosive devices could exploit exactly those kinds of structural and systems vulnerabilities. The championship game had brought together the largest crowd in stadium history. Playoff atmosphere, national television coverage, and the kind of high-profile event that attracted attention from security agencies nationwide. It was also exactly the kind of symbolic target that appealed to individuals and organizations who wanted maximum impact for their violent messages. The call came in at 2:47 p.m., just as the second quarter was reaching its climax. A credible bomb threat had been phoned in to local police, claiming that multiple explosive devices had been planted throughout the stadium and would detonate during the fourth quarter when crowd excitement reached its peak. Rick's Army EOD training activated immediately. While other security personnel began implementing standard evacuation procedures, Rick was analyzing the threat from the perspective of someone who understood how explosive devices were designed, deployed, and triggered in high-value target environments. The threat wasn't random. It demonstrated detailed knowledge of stadium operations, crowd psychology, and the timing that would maximize casualties. The caller had specifically mentioned locations that indicated reconnaissance of the facility's most vulnerable structural points. This wasn't amateur intimidation. This was operational planning by someone who understood both explosives and the target environment. Rick realized that standard evacuation procedures, while appropriate for most threats, could actually increase casualties if genuine explosive devices had been strategically placed to target evacuation routes and emergency exits. His EOD experience had taught him that sophisticated bombers often planned for predictable security responses, using evacuation chaos to maximize the effectiveness of their attacks. While stadium management coordinated with FBI bomb technicians who were en route, Rick began implementing threat assessment protocols that he'd learned during explosive ordnance disposal operations in combat zones. He was analyzing the stadium's infrastructure from the perspective of someone who had spent years learning to think like bomb makers, understanding how they selected targets, positioned devices, and triggered detonations for maximum impact. The most critical decision was whether to continue standard evacuation or implement shelter-in-place protocols until the threat could be properly assessed. Rick's military experience told him that moving 80,000 people through predetermined evacuation routes could be exactly what the bomber was counting on to achieve mass casualties. Rick's EOD expertise allowed him to make tactical decisions that other security professionals couldn't. He understood explosive device placement, triggering mechanisms, and the structural analysis that determined how bombs could be most effectively used against large facilities. His first priority was identifying the most likely locations for device placement based on the threat caller's specific knowledge and the tactical objectives that would drive bomber decision-making. Rick's combat experience had taught him to think like the enemy, understanding how explosive devices were positioned to achieve maximum structural damage and human casualties. Using his knowledge of stadium infrastructure combined with EOD principles, Rick began coordinating with facility engineers to identify structural vulnerabilities that a sophisticated bomber might exploit. His analysis focused on load-bearing supports, electrical systems, and crowd choke points that could turn evacuation routes into kill zones. Rick's communication with incoming FBI bomb technicians demonstrated expertise that exceeded normal security training. He was providing tactical analysis of potential device placement, structural assessment of blast effects, and risk evaluation that helped federal agents prioritize their search activities in the massive facility. The most dangerous moment came when Rick identified a suspicious package in a location that matched his tactical analysis of optimal device placement. His EOD training allowed him to conduct initial assessment using visual indicators and environmental analysis that could determine threat level without triggering potential remote detonation systems. His approach to the suspicious device demonstrated the kind of methodical precision that characterized military explosive ordnance disposal. Rick understood standoff distances, blast patterns, and the technical indicators that distinguished genuine explosive devices from hoax materials designed to create panic without actual capability. When FBI bomb technicians arrived, they found Rick had already established proper security perimeters, evacuated critical personnel from blast radius zones, and provided tactical intelligence that allowed them to focus their technical analysis on the most likely threat locations. Coordinator Mason, your threat assessment and tactical response exceeded anything we'd expect from civilian security, said FBI Special Agent Sarah Rodriguez as bomb technicians completed their sweep. Your understanding of explosive device placement and blast analysis suggests serious military training. How did you know how to conduct EOD assessment with that level of expertise? Rick's response stunned everyone present. I spent 10 years as an Army explosive ordnance disposal specialist conducting bomb disposal operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. When I left active duty, I wanted to continue protecting people, but I never expected to use my EOD training to assess threats against American civilians in a sports stadium. The investigation revealed that Rick's technical analysis had been flawless. The suspicious package he'd identified contained components that could have been assembled into an explosive device, though analysis determined it was ultimately a sophisticated hoax designed to test security response capabilities rather than cause actual harm. Stadium General Manager Michael Chen realized he had been employing a former Army EOD specialist as routine security coordinator. Rick, you're not just stadium security, You're a military explosive ordnance disposal expert whose technical knowledge just prevented what could have been a catastrophic attack on 80,000 innocent people. FBI agent Rodriguez was particularly impressed by Rick's tactical judgment under extreme pressure. The decision to modify evacuation procedures based on EOD threat analysis potentially saved thousands of lives. If genuine devices had been positioned to target evacuation routes, standard protocols could have resulted in mass casualties. What amazed federal investigators was Rick's ability to balance technical EOD assessment with civilian crowd management responsibilities. His military training had allowed him to evaluate explosive threats while maintaining the kind of calm leadership that prevented panic among security personnel and stadium staff. News of the incident spread throughout professional sports and military communities within hours. Rick's successful application of Army EOD expertise to civilian stadium security demonstrated how specialized military training could be effectively utilized in protecting large-scale public events from sophisticated terrorist threats. The story resonated particularly strongly with other military veterans working in civilian security roles, showing that their technical training provided capabilities that could be essential for managing threats that exceeded conventional security planning. Many veterans had felt their specialized skills weren't relevant to civilian protection work, but Rick's example proved otherwise. Federal security agencies conducted extensive analysis of the incident, recognizing that professional sports venues faced evolving threats that required technical expertise beyond conventional crowd control and access management. They wanted to understand how Rick's EOD background had enabled such effective threat assessment and whether his methods could be adapted for other high-profile venue security operations. Rick worked closely with FBI counterterrorism specialists, Department of Homeland Security venue protection experts, and professional sports security coordinators to develop enhanced threat assessment protocols that incorporated EOD principles while maintaining the commercial viability and fan experience that made professional sports successful. The incident had profound effects on how major sporting events approached security planning. Rick's technical analysis had revealed vulnerabilities that conventional security assessments had missed, demonstrating that sophisticated threats required specialized technical knowledge to evaluate and counter effectively. More importantly, Rick's approach had demonstrated that military EOD expertise could be successfully integrated into civilian security operations without militarizing the sports entertainment experience. His technical competence had prevented panic while providing the specialized knowledge needed to assess genuine explosive threats. The players and coaching staff were particularly affected by the realization that their security coordinator possessed life-saving technical expertise that had protected not just them, but tens of thousands of fans who had come to enjoy America's favorite sport. Rick decided to remain with the professional sports organization, but with expanded responsibilities that utilized his unique technical qualifications. The NFL hired him as Director of Stadium Security and Threat Assessment, responsible for developing explosive threat evaluation protocols for major sporting venues nationwide. Federal law enforcement agencies maintained Rick as a consultant for cases involving threats against large-scale public events that required technical EOD assessment capabilities. But his primary focus remained on ensuring that professional sports could continue to bring communities together without fear of catastrophic violence. Veterans organizations highlighted Rick's story as an example of how specialized military training could be successfully applied to civilian roles that served public safety while providing meaningful employment for technical specialists transitioning from military service. 2 years later, Rick had revolutionized security operations at professional sports venues across the country. His protocols for explosive threat assessment, structural vulnerability analysis, and coordinated response had prevented numerous potential incidents while maintaining the celebratory atmosphere that made professional sports a unifying force in American culture. More importantly, Rick had demonstrated that military EOD expertise could enhance civilian security without creating a fortress mentality that destroyed the communal experience of professional sports. His approach combined technical competence with a genuine understanding of sports culture and the community values that made athletic competition meaningful. The stadium itself had become a model for venue security that protected both participants and spectators from sophisticated threats while preserving the accessibility and excitement that made professional sports special. Security experts and federal agencies studied Rick's methods for protecting large-scale public events. Detective Maria Santos, who had coordinated with Rick during the bomb threat response, often brought new officers to the stadium for training. "This is what professional venue security looks like," she would tell them. Not just managing crowds and checking tickets, but understanding technical threats well enough to prevent catastrophic attacks on American communities. Rick Mason continues his security work with professional sports, but everyone in the organization now understands that their director of stadium security brings something extraordinary to his role. He's the former Army EOD specialist who chose civilian sports security over military contracting, who understands that protecting America's sporting traditions is just as important as conducting explosive ordnance disposal in foreign combat zones. His story reminds us that military expertise developed in service to our nation doesn't end when specialists leave active duty. It continues in new forms of community protection that may be less visible, but are equally essential to preserving the freedoms and traditions that make American life possible. Sometimes the person ensuring security at professional sporting events carries training from the Army's most technical and dangerous specialties, quietly preventing terrorist attacks with skills developed defusing bombs in the world's most hostile environments. These are the professionals who understand that protecting innocent people from explosive violence requires both technical expertise and genuine commitment to the communities they serve. Rick's choice to remain in civilian sports security rather than pursue high-profile military contracting represents something fundamental about service, that protecting people doesn't require combat zones or media recognition. Sometimes the most valuable service happens in stadiums across America, provided by professionals whose expertise ensures that families can enjoy sporting events together without fear. The next time you attend a professional sporting event and notice the security personnel who seem particularly observant and technically competent, remember Rick's story. Some of them might just be former military specialists whose background in explosive ordnance disposal continues to serve and protect, one stadium at a time.